Hey everybody, welcome back to World History with Mr. Finn. Today we have some notes, but really the most important thing today is to get a little bit into the future because there's a lot of things happening in this time period that we're talking about here. Of really like 1500 to let's say 1750, because I don't want to get too far ahead since so there's some big things that happened in the 1700s. Trust me, we'll see. We'll take a look at them. And so, just to get back on track here, here's where we're at. We went from the Dark Ages to exploration. And really we went back to even before that. Growth of cities. We can't really downplay that because we went from the growth of cities out of the Dark Ages, where people coming together, and then we had that rebirth with the Renaissance. So that's another thing that we had. And then from the Renaissance, we went to this exploration, age of exploration. Alongside that, we started to enter we'll just say science, our scientific revolution. So we're going pretty quick, considering the Dark Ages were 1,000 years of craziness happening during that time period. In a relatively brief historical time period of 200 years, we're jumping back to like, hey, people living in cities, having currency and money, economic systems. We're exploring the world. We have science. We're starting to think differently, which then takes us into the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment. What is the Enlightenment? Now, the Enlightenment is going to be now start to take science and the idea of natural laws and stuff like that and apply it to society. How does our society work? So really we're going to talk about this final piece of this kind of transition, because then once we get to 1750, we're going to start to jump into some revolutions. The American Revolution, we have the French Revolution, we have the ideas of the Enlightenment are going to spur on new ways of thinking about our government. So let's talk about the Enlightenment today briefly, because really that's this final part before we get to people thinking. The Enlightenment is, as I just said, let's just say this, it's question everything, but in this case particularly, it's question the government, question society. Why do we do the certain things we do? The old ways of this idea of I don't think we've done divine right theory yet, but divine right basically says God has decided. Divine right of kings. God has decided. I was born to be the king. It's pretty easy, right? If you happen to be lucky enough to be born into royalty, that's in God's hands. God has chosen that it's divine, so that you have the right to rule because it has been divinely set up or set into motion. How do you argue that, right? I'm a normal person. I'm not royalty. They're like, well, God just didn't want you to rule. It's like, okay. Is there any other options? No. Sorry. If you were meant to rule, you would have been born into royalty. So, like, how do you fight that off? It's kind of a crazy way. I mean, it works for the people in charge, that's for sure, because this divine right allows them just to rule, and if they happen to be born that way and the royalty, they're good. So Enlightenment's really going to start to question the government, question divine right theory, question why we do things, how is government supposed to work, everything. And so let's take a look. I mean, there's a ton of Enlightenment thinkers. In fact, our founding fathers of the United States of America are right smack dab in the Enlightenment. They are raised during the Enlightenment time period. That's why they have questions about government, have questions about the King of England, since we are colonies here in America. And we set up the country that we set up. So, a couple of the things that come out of this that we will see in other classes are things like separation of powers, right? Put my of. So if you believe in divine right theory, the king is just in charge. But people start to think a different type of way, and that is going to be a way of a social contract. This idea of, it actually kind of goes back a little bit to feudalism and the idea of like, I owe allegiance to you, you owe allegiance to me. So in this social contract, really the idea is more freedom for the person being ruled, but person in charge is in charge, or should, we'll use look out for the people. I wonder what your book defines it as. Let me see if I can see separation of powers. It's got to be around here somewhere. So give me, or not separation for social contract. Actually, it's on the next page. Entire society agrees to be governed by its general will. Basically that. So like the people say, hey, we allow you to rule. You look out for us. It's the way it goes. But if you don't look out for us, under the idea of the Enlightenment, we have the right to install a new government, which leads us to the question of revolution and things like that, because basically what you're saying is this: hey, you're allowed to rule. I agree. That's great. However, if you are not ruling over me and the rest of the people, if you're not looking out for us and you're only looking out for you, we have the right to have a revolution and put in someone new that will do that job, which again leads us down the way of possible revolutions. Separation of powers is another one. And with a king, I know we're a little bit all over here. A king is one person. We had absolutism. There's countries in Europe that had a king who had absolute power. The idea now is, hey, we don't want one person to have too much power, because if one person has all the power, there could be corruption, they could only look out for themselves, they could not do the ideas that we are coming up with in this Enlightenment of looking out for people. They would be the only person in charge. So the idea is separate this one power. This is one power. In the United States, we're actually going to have 3 branches of government. So let's just call it break power up. Spread it around. No one person gets too powerful. We don't have one king. We have a president, but the president has limits on his power because our power has been separated. So this is another idea that comes out of the Enlightenment that our founding fathers are going to know about. They're going to know these ideas of separation of powers and the social contract. People start going back to democracies and the way the Greeks had done it before. Like, could people rule over themselves? How would we do that again? We start to think in the Enlightenment about economics. This is the first time we start to see economics. This is the first time we are going to start to see the ideas of, you'll get it in U.S. history, but I'll tell you this. Capitalism is the United States of America's economic system. It's basically off of a free market, meaning that anyone can take place in the economy. You can do whatever you want in the economy. You are free to choose whatever you would like to do, and the economy will run itself. It's a freedom idea where, listen, anyone can get involved. We don't tell you what you have to do, what you can or cannot do. You don't need to be in a guild system anymore. If you want to sell cupcakes, go sell cupcakes. If it works and you make money, good for you. If it doesn't, you'll be out of business, and the market has corrected itself. The government didn't have to step in. The government didn't have to do anything. You either made it or you didn't make it. But this is another idea of, hey, listen, the government's not in control of the economy. Let it be free for the people. Social contract, the people should agree to let you rule. It's all about freedom, the idea of what is right, what is wrong, natural laws, inalienable rights, that you have as a person. Like, as a person, I have the right to do certain things. I got to think about the individual, not just the government. And all of this goes into this time period of the Enlightenment. A big thing about the Enlightenment also is, this starts to pop up. Reading, shocker. Reading goes up. Books, up. Education, up. All of this is valued now. If you went back to the year 800, you would have been valued if you could use a sword and defend yourself. All of a sudden, the people who are the leaders of these like colonies and within their countries and universities and lawyers and all this stuff, they're all intelligent. They're all about the scientific revolution. They're all about the Enlightenment. They think about stuff. They talk about stuff. They read other people's works. They are academics. They're mind strong. They philosophize. They think about stuff. These are the people who are going to be considered now kind of like the upper class people. Another thing about why they're considered upper class people is they have the luxury. You can't read books if you're trying to live. So generally speaking, they came from a upper middle class, and that would be at the least. Like, rarely would you find someone who was coming from just absolute like poor, homeless, no parents, no stuff. I mean, they do exist, though. That's another thing about the Enlightenment. Before the idea of the Enlightenment and in getting intelligent, working on yourself, trying to learn these things, you were stuck. Like, you had to do whatever your family had always done. At least with the Enlightenment, you have the ability, if you can, if you're smart enough, if you're gifted enough, if you're there, it doesn't matter if you're dirt poor or super rich. You can make it. If you can go to college, if you can get an education, if you can put the time in to get educated, you can make something of yourself, which is kind of the basis or the idea of the United States in the beginning, where it's like, come here, work hard, try and make money, get to a certain level, and you can make it. In the United States, we'll see Alexander Hamilton, for example, who was an orphan living on an island in the Caribbean, right? People were like, dude, this dude's smart. This kid, he's like 16, he's super smart. Let's get him up to the colonies. Let's get him to New York. Like, he can make something of himself. And, he's going to become one of the most intelligent founding fathers of all time. He's going to be a huge influence on George Washington, saves our economy. And he was a dirt poor orphan living in the Caribbean on an island. So he could make it because of these new ideas, breaking away from the old way of government and the person in charge is absolute monarch and nobility, and you can't do it unless you are born into it. The Enlightenment's going to allow for basically freedom and chances, which I think takes us to where we need to go. Oh, the last thing I wanted to mention was this. There's a war in the United States, and it comes before our American Revolution. So first, take the Enlightenment, understand this. Our founding fathers here in America in the 1700s, as 1750 is around. This is all Enlightenment thought. The people who were leaders here in America are Enlightenment thinkers. Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, just John Adams, down the list. All of our founding fathers had those ideas and would discuss and talk about what they personally thought about things. But in 1750 or so, we are going to see what we call, it's called the 7 Years' War in world history class. For us, it is called the French and Indian War. That's the term. We use the term native today, but the title of the war is the French and Indian War. And technically, the French and the natives were on the same side. All right. This is a super important event for us in the American Revolution. You'll hear about this in U.S. history class, but the French and Indian War put the French and the natives versus colonists and England. So it put the colonists, the American colonists, and England, its mother country, against the French and the Native Americans. We don't need to get into the war itself, but in this war, the French and the Native Americans are going to lose, leaving just the colonists and the English. The English had spent a lot of money coming here to defend the colonies and defend the colonists against the French and the natives. And so England now, at this point in time, after this 7 Years' War, England is in a mini depression. England needs money, which is the precursor. This is where I stop. But with England needing money, what are they going to try and do? Well, who do they spend a lot of money helping? The colonists. So England needs money. What do they do to the colonies? They are going to begin to tax the colonies here in America. The colonists are not going to like that. We're going to have an issue with it. And this is what's going to start American history class, really. The French and Indian War, the colonists here in America were defended by England. England, after the war, is out of money, needs money, says, how can we get it? Well, we help the colonists. Let's tax them a little bit, and then we'll have money, and we'll be okay. But the colonists don't play ball, and that's what's going to lead us into revolution, with the Enlightenment thinking that England, the King of England, is not looking out for us. The King of England itself is not looking out for us, the people. We know about the Enlightenment. The fundamental idea of the Enlightenment is if the government is not looking out for you, you have the right to overthrow that government and install a new government for yourself, which is going to be what we do, and we'll get to it. But turn in the notes today, because you had an assignment and a quiz last class for attendance and participation purposes, and I will see you next class.